Meet Mike Burgins, a senior executive at the King Bun's Burger chain, the largest and most popular fast food restaurant chain across the Seminole state. Mike and his wife Carol and 4 children reside at the Royal Palms Estate, a wealthy gated community in southern Sunset City. Proud owner of a blue 1985 Chevrolet Corvette, an avid golfer and an occasional sailor, Mike doesn't know this yet, but his house is about to burn down. That sucks. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start at the beginning. And you know what? This story actually has a couple of beginnings, but we're going to start here with the build. Because before the Burginses can even move into their house at the Royal Palm Estate, we first got to build it. Like a lot of places in Sunset City, you can see that there is already something down here. However, this was just a placeholder just to get a bit of an idea of what I wanted to build in this area when we finally got to it and added in those fine details. Well, we're finally getting to it and we're going to be finally adding in those finer details. A lot of fines in that sentence. In this episode, we're going to be turning this neighborhood into a gated community. We're actually going to be building quite a lot of these across Sunset City. They are quite common across America, and a lot of them were built in the 1980s, which is exactly when Sunset City is based in. So it kind of feels like the sort of thing, the sort of city planning that I would like to really showcase within this series. Not to mention, I do find these places super fascinating and have always wanted to build one really well within Cities Skylines. I've built a couple of them, but I don't think I did a good job of it. Whereas this one, I think I'm pretty happy with the way it turns out. And look, just because I want to build this in Cities Skylines doesn't mean that I think it's going to work out great for Sunset City. In fact, it doesn't. It's not a great way of building a city, but this is how cities are built. This is how a lot of Florida looks. A lot of Florida has a lot of gated communities, which means that Sunset City is going to have quite a lot of these as well. And look, I'm up for it. I like building highways. I like building cities that are interesting to me. And Miami is quite an interesting place. Florida is an interesting place. Doesn't mean that I think gated communities are great, and I don't think highways are great either. A lot of the things that I build within Cities Skylines, I don't think are great, but I do find them super fascinating, and gated communities I find very fascinating. City Beautiful, as usual, has an excellent video about gated communities, and I'll leave a link to it in the description below. But he basically describes and details why these places are not great for society. These suburbs are privately owned, which means that it's not the government looking after the roads and the landscaping of golf courses, which these places typically have some sort of golf course, not all of them, but a lot of them do. A lot of the ones that we're going to be building are going to have golf courses. This one definitely will. But because these places are privately owned, it means that the general public can't just drive in and access the parks or access the facilities. And look, I guess that does make sense. These places are advertising safety and community and a place that is well looked after, but not everyone can afford to live in a gated community. It doesn't work that way. And then it also encourages people to drive, because then to leave your community, you got to drive out of it. So then there's no public transport that goes into these places. Typically they are quite walkable, but then you have to drive to leave them. So then we're encouraging driving. So then you just spend all your time in your gated community. Well, you know, the best thing about cities is how multicultural it is, how everyone kind of comes from all these different stretches of life. You don't really get that in a gated community. And yeah, I think that's a bit sad. But that's just my perspective. Let me know yours. And like I said, I think that City Beautiful always does a much better job at articulating these things, far better than yours truly. So this is the Royal Palm Estate, one of many gated communities that we're going to be building in Sunset City. So this is my first attempt, and I learned a lot, and a lot of things I would change for the future. But something that really surprised me was just how good these vanilla villas really are. I always forget about them, and then, you know, every now and again when I'm scrolling through trying to find just the right type of building, the right type of house, I just go back to them because they are truly great. However, their colors are a little bit weird, and, you know, some of the props are a bit strange, so we will fix them up a little bit later on. But for the most part, I wanted to keep this fairly low detail in the general nature of the way that it looks, but then some certain areas we're going to add in those extra details. But for me, it's all about the road layouts for these places, because they do have a very typical type of layout. There's always a lot of cul-de-sacs, there's always a lot of windy roads, and there's typically just the one road in. and that's usually a gated entrance. So we'll be making sure that we include that. At the moment, we're still a little bit connected up to other places, but I will remove them because we will need a little bit of extra room when it comes to building our golf course. Like I said, these villas do have some pretty weird colors, so I'm using the colorize mod just to change some of the colors of them, just to make them look a little bit more natural, and then also changing the roof color because these places typically have the same types of houses with the same types of rooftops, so you gotta make sure that they've all got that orange tint. Just seems to be the Florida thing. And it was about this time that I realized that I needed just a little bit of extra room just to make sure that we did have that one road access coming in. I did really want to really demonstrate that, but then also leave enough room to start developing up our golf course, which ended up being far larger than I expected. A little bit smaller than you probably would typically see, but I don't think we can get it much bigger than this or much smaller than this. Unfortunately, scale is not on our side here. Golf courses are very large, and I do not have a huge amount of space in Sunset City, so I do need to play it safe and just scale it down a little bit. So it's definitely not the right amount of holes. It's definitely on the smaller side of things. If you're an avid golfer, I know you're probably it's probably a little bit annoying, but I think it's probably right in terms of the type of scale that we're going for. If you're wondering about the golf course assets that I'm using, I've recently become a supporter for Thomas132 on Patreon, who has got just so many different assets that are either inspired by Florida or Miami or are just complete, just buildings from there. And they're just absolutely perfect. He's got a bunch on the Steam Workshop and he's got a bunch on Patreon as well, which he also releases on the Steam Workshop after a while. But I've been using his assets for many years now, and you know, when I heard that he had a lot of these ones that I really wanted to use, I was like, absolutely, that's a no-brainer for me. So we are using a bunch of them. You'll see a lot of other buildings that I'll be using that are by him, already using by him as well. So just in case you're wondering, that's what's going on. But I'm also trying to figure out whereabouts these paths are going to go, because I did want them to be all connected up so that people could access the different sections of the course, range of the course, fields of the course, it's something like that. I don't really know what it is. I'm also trying to figure out the types of trees that I'm going to be using. I go with these ones at first, but I do end up changing them because they are just too big for this area. They are actually to scale and they look fine with the golf course, but then just with the rest of the city it doesn't look right. They're just a little bit too large. So I'm going to be changing them a little bit later on. I also changed the trees within the actual property, you know, them placing these down, but I'm not totally committed to them just because they are, again, too large and they are probably, I need to think a little bit more critically about where they're going. They're not really placed in the right spots. But as I work on this little pond that sits within the community, I wanted to talk about the other starting point of this episode. There's actually a couple of starting points. Because if you remember the very first episode of Sunset City, where I did that whole thing about I would like the places that we build to be inspired by the stories that we write, or something like that. But the thing is, I haven't been able to do that because I felt like the city needed to be built before we could start working on things like that. But now that the city, I mean, it's not built, but it's definitely at a point where I feel like it's got a bit of personality and it's looking kind of nice in some areas. But my plan for this series is always to start embedding characters and people into this city, into this series. And not only that, but also have them shape the way that our episodes and our city starts to take shape. So for instance, Mike Burgins, he lives at this place, at least lived at this place until his house burnt down. I guess you'll just have to find out the rest of that story later on. But, you know, he's not just some random guy. He's an executive. He's a high-up executive that works for the King Bun's burger chain, and that's not just some random burger chain in real life. That's a real-life burger chain in Sunset City that was made by some of the fine people on my Discord server that have been helping me out create some custom companies. We've actually got 4 of them. This one was made by the Goat62, who created the King Bun's logo. Seabud, the asset creator, has created it into a prop, which I have placed down within the game. And you'll see me create the whole chain of, well, the whole food chain, whole industries chain, I guess you'd probably say, in the next episode. And you know what? I want to do that for every single one of our companies. And I also would like there to be characters who own that company, characters who work for that company, and also embedding new people within our series. And not just having them random people, but also having them influence the way that the city looks and how the city changes. And I guess use this as a bit of an example as something that could be embedded by you guys in future episodes. I like the idea that Sunset City can be influenced by the people that live here, the people that work here, that own companies, the people that just work at these companies. And I'd like it to come from you guys, not just from me. If you've got any ideas, let me know in the comment section. I'll be pinning stories that I'll most probably be doing in the next episode. But I'll be trying to take on board quite a lot of the ideas and suggestions, and it won't just be the whole episode dedicated to it, but it'll be kind of just embedded within the storyline that we create for Sunset City. In the next episode, we'll be continuing to look at the King Bun's burger chain and placing down some of the buildings within the city, but then also Fab Soda that was made by Clom, and I've got no stories or ideas for that one. So if you've got any ideas, characters, owners, places, storylines, hit me up. Okay, so what have I been up to since I've been just talking about all those crazy ideas? So I've been trying to figure out the water that sits around and within our gated community, because the places around Florida, I mean, you know, being such a wet area, being, you know, on the Everglades, a lot of these places, they've got just, they've just got like ponds and rivers and lakes all the way through them, all these streams and stuff. But as you know, it is super annoying and tricky to make streams within Cities Skylines, so I'm using this awesome network. I guess it's a bit of a collaboration with Zardas and Ronic69, who created the decal, and then Zardas turned it into a network. But it's super handy for these areas because, I mean, you can't create a stream like this in Cities Skylines, you have to use a network instead, and this works out really well. There is an actual river that stretches behind and surrounding the community, and I wanted to make it all foresty and bushy and mangrovey around that area. So we're gonna come back and add in some extra stuff there as well. Now, it wouldn't be a gated community if there wasn't an actual gate, and of course if there wasn't an actual golf course, because so many of these places do have golf courses. So I wanted to make sure to include one of them as well. But working on this gate, I was using procedural objects just to stretch it out a little bit and then copy it over so that we could have two ends of it and this little wall area in the middle. And that works it like a nice little gate just there. And you can see vehicles driving in and out, and it's got that classic architecture. It's just super pretty. And then we've also got this pond to the left-hand side, and I wanted just to place a bit of a seawall around it. I mean, it is a seawall, but I just wanted to make it a little bit more decorated on the sides, adding in some palm trees and some little shrubs just down below as well. These lily pad props are awesome. They float and just amazing. I believe they are made by Mr. Mason. And I would have really liked to have placed down some sort of fountain, but didn't have anything within my asset collection. So that might just be something that we come back and add at a later date. And then it was time to actually make the Burgins' house. And once again, I've used procedural objects to convert the vanilla building, the vanilla villa, into this procedural object, because that means I can remove all the ugly props that come with it and detail it up myself. Now, I don't recommend doing this with your entire city, with every single house, just to detail it and make it look perfect. That's ridiculous, nobody will do that. Procedural objects is an amazing mod, but use it, I reckon just use it sparingly, because using too many of them, first of all, takes a lot of time, and you will spend your entire time just detailing one suburb or one house. I highly recommend just using it sparingly when you've got pretty much no other options, and man, it gives you a lot of options, and I absolutely love it. But don't use it too much, just sparingly. But as you can see, I've added in so many nice little trees and bushes and props just around that house, just to add that detail in before we burn it to the ground. And now I'm just going through and adding in just some details behind these other houses. But when I say details, very low details. I did really want to capture that feeling and that look, and the real juxtaposition of having the manicured and looked after lawns of people's properties, but then having the wildness of the river that stretches behind here and the Everglades kind of creeping onto this gated community. I always love that. Maybe that's something Remember, that's something that I really like about these gated communities, is that you've got these barriers that pretty much separate one way of living, this one type of environment from another. And I think that this best represents that. And I always find those sort of areas very fascinating. Something that I wanted to include was I wanted to see people actually using the golf course. These are parks, and I do place them on pedestrian pathways so that people are accessing them and they are providing land value to this area. But I did want to see a little bit of movement, so I've placed down this road that is now stretching through here, and I had to create a little bit of a roundabout at the end of the road. And as you can see, I'm placing down a bus network because we do have these awesome bus network assets, these vehicles that will drive along here, and they are little bike carts, little golf carts. They obviously don't allow for any golf to be played around here. They don't transport people to and from anywhere. It's actually just purely for looks. And one of the many cases where I am just wasting money in Sunset City. I've got a whole bus network here and does absolutely nothing besides making this place look interesting. And one of the many reasons why we're probably going to tank in finance at some point, because we are just wasting money on little things like a little buggy just driving around, taking people nowhere. Just a little bus driving people nowhere. But I tell you what, he was driving down that road pretty fast, so I had to change the speed limit using Traffic President mod, and then also disable any other vehicles from driving on there. I didn't want to see anything else, so got rid of that pretty quickly. And then of course had to turn it into a district because I wanted to test out this mod that I had seen and someone had told me about it on Discord. It's called Vehicle Wealthorizer. It's been out for a while now, and it allows you to change what types of vehicles are spawned for what type of income that household is earning. So basically for all the people in this community, they are actually it's like high land value, and we've got high income families that live in this community, which means that by selecting these vehicles, we should only see really nice or expensive vehicles driving in and out of this gated community. And I tell you what, my friends, that is exactly what I want. I want to see that sort of thing happening in Sunset City. I want to see those sort of details. This is a wealthy community, so I do want to see those types of vehicles driving in and out. And speaking of those details before, well, here we are with some of the details of the storyline of Mike Burgins and his family and their poor house that is now just burnt down. Well, I'm using procedural objects to sink that building into the ground and skew some of the pieces of that building so it looks like it's a little bit more damaged, adding in some piles. That is all part of the Natural Disasters DLC, some great assets there, some great props, and just changing some of the color of the hedges and trees around here and the props around some of the other houses here because there would have been a bit of fire damage. And now this house is just going to stay like this. This is just part of the story, one of those places that you're going to see. You guys will know when you see that house, yeah, that's Mike Burgins' old house. And that's exactly what it is. This is his old house. If you're wondering how this house was burnt down, well, let's just say Mike Burgins is a bit of a dodgy guy. A bit of a dodgy guy with a hell of an insurance, which has now just covered him for that house that just burnt down. You see, Mike Burgins does earn quite a lot of money, but he's going to need a hell of a lot more if he's ever going to buy into the market onto the newly announced island suburbs for the super rich. You see, unfortunately, Mike has accumulated quite a lot of debt over the years. I'll let you guys figure out why and how. But for now, that is it for Mike Burgins' story, and that is it for today's episode. As always, thank you guys so much for watching today's episode, and a huge shout out to my patrons for supporting the channel. Patrick Fekatish, David Schenker, Jace Chatter, Rex Fernandez, Jibba, Aces Punk, Thomas Riley, Ricky Killen, Nick Ashab, Guinness and Niner Phoenix, and Not Validated. Thank you guys so much for the support. I'll catch you all in the next one.